The ceasefire lasted exactly 1 hour and 43 minutes before everything went wrong. Admiral Jiwan was in her ready room reviewing casualty reports when the alarm sounded. She was on the bridge in seconds, Captain Hyun already at his station with a grim expression. "Report," Jiwan ordered. "The Valdrine just launched a full assault," Hyun said quickly. "All remaining ships. They're targeting us directly." "Admiral, they're throwing everything at the Incheon's pride." Jiwan felt her stomach drop. She had expected Thraken to retreat after the ceasefire. Instead, he had used it to regroup and plan one final desperate attack. It was a violation of the ceasefire, but more than that, it was smart. Take out the human command ship and the fleet might fall into chaos. It was exactly what Jiwan would have done if their positions were reversed. "All ships, defensive formation," Jiwan ordered. "Protect the flagship. Do not let them through." But even as she gave the order, she could see it might not be enough. The Valdrine were coming with everything they had left. Over 100 ships in a concentrated spearhead formation, all aimed at one target. The Incheon's Pride Commander Minho saw the Valdrine assault formation from the Seoul Vengeance and didn't hesitate. "Helm, full speed toward the flagship. Put us between them and Admiral Park." "Commander, that will put us directly in their firing line," his executive officer warned. "I know," Minho said. "Do it anyway." The massive colony ship turned and accelerated, her upgraded engines pushing her forward faster than any ship her size should be able to move. She wasn't alone. Across the fleet, human captains were making the same decision. The Gwangju, the New Horizon, the destroyer Busan, the frigate Daegu. Every ship within range moved to shield the flagship. Lieutenant Yoonji Han watched the Valdrine fleet approach on her tactical display. There were so many of them, too many. The Gwangju was directly in their path now, a single destroyer against 100 warships. She thought about her family back on Earth, her parents in Seoul, her younger brother who wanted to join the fleet when he was old enough. She hoped he would get the chance. "All weapons, rapid fire," her captain ordered. "Everything we have. Make every shot count." Unji's hands moved across her console. The Gwangju's railguns began firing continuously, slug after slug screaming into the Valdrine formation. She could see the impacts, see Valdrine shields flaring and failing, see hulls tearing apart. But there were so many of them. For every ship she hit, 2 more kept coming. The Valdrine opened fire. Plasma torpedoes and quantum missiles filled the space between the fleets. The Gwangju's shields held for the first barrage. And the second. On the third barrage, they failed. The destroyer's hull armor absorbed some of the impacts, but not enough. Fire bloomed along her spine. Atmosphere vented into space. "Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7, someone reported. "We've lost main power. Secondary systems failing." Yoonji looked at her captain. He was an older man named Daejung, who had served in the fleet for 30 years. He met her eyes and nodded slightly. They both knew what was coming. "All hands, this is the captain," Daejung said over the ship-wide channel. His voice was calm. "Abandon ship. Get to the escape pods." "That's an order, Captain," Yoonji said quietly. "We're still in weapons range," Daejung smiled. "I know. Someone needs to keep them busy while the crew evacuates. I'll handle it." "You get to a pod, Lieutenant." "That's an order." Unji shook her head. "With respect, sir, I'm the weapons officer. This console is my post." Around the bridge, other officers were refusing to leave. The helm officer, the tactical officer, the communications specialist. They were all staying. Daejung looked at them and felt pride swell in his chest. "Then let's make this count," he said. "Full power to weapons. If we're going down, we're taking some of them with us." The Gwangju fired her railguns until the barrels melted. She fired her missiles until the magazines were empty. She aimed her damaged hull at the nearest Valdrine battleship and engaged her engines one final time. The collision was visible across the entire battlefield, a bright flash as 2 warships merged and died together. Lieutenant Yoonji Han's final transmission was simple and clear. "Not one step back." On the Incheon's Pride, Admiral Jiwan heard those words and felt tears sting her eyes. She couldn't take time to mourn, not yet. The Valdrine were still coming, and now the Gwangju was gone. "Admiral, shields at 30%, Hyun reported. We've taken hits on the port side. Casualties reported on multiple decks." The flagship shuddered as another barrage struck home. Alarms blared. Lights flickered. Jiwon gripped her command chair and made a decision. "All ships fall back to secondary positions," she ordered, "except the generation ships. New Horizon, Destiny, and Wanderer moved to the front of the formation. Admiral? Hyun looked at her in confusion. Those are the oldest, least armed ships in the fleet. Trust me, Ji-won said. She opened a private channel to the 3-generation ship captains. This is it. Execute final protocol. Authorization Park Alpha 7. On the bridge of the New Horizon, Captain Sora Kim received the order and took a deep breath. She had known this moment might come. They had all known. The final protocol was a last resort, something that would only be used when victory seemed impossible. All hands, evacuate to escape sections, Sora ordered. Engineering, prepare for reactor overload. Controlled burn, maximum output. Her chief engineer looked at her in shock. Captain, if we overload the reactor, I know what will happen, Sora interrupted. Do it anyway. We have 5 minutes to get non-essential crew off this ship. Move. The generation ships were the oldest vessels in the fleet, built 400 years ago to carry colonists to distant stars. Their fusion reactors were massive, designed to run for decades without refueling. And those reactors had been upgraded during Project Inheritance, replaced with zero-point energy cores that were vastly more powerful. What the Valdrine didn't know was that those cores could be overloaded, not to cause an explosion, but to generate an electromagnetic pulse so powerful it would disrupt every electronic system within thousands of kilometers. The 3-generation ships moved into position, forming a triangle around the battlefield. Escape pods launched continuously, carrying crew members to safety. Captain Sora stayed on the bridge watching the timer count down. She thought about her daughter back on Earth who was just starting university. She hoped the girl would understand why her mother made this choice. Reactor at critical levels, the chief engineer reported. He had refused to evacuate too. 30 seconds to overload. The Valdrine were closing on the Incheon's Pride, almost in firing range of the flagship. Overlord Thraken could see victory within reach. One more push and the human admiral would be dead. The fleet would fall apart. The Empire would win. Then the generation ship's reactors reached critical mass simultaneously. 3 electromagnetic pulses erupted across the battlefield, invisible but devastating. Every electronic system in the Valdrine fleet shut down instantly. Quantum shields collapsed. Weapon systems failed. Navigation computers went dark. Life support continued to function on backup power, but the Valdrine warships were suddenly dead in space, floating helplessly. The human fleet had been prepared. Their older backup systems, less sophisticated and less vulnerable to electromagnetic interference, kicked in immediately. Ships that had been built with redundancy and simplicity suddenly had an enormous advantage. All ships target the disabled Valdrine vessels, Ji-won ordered. Her voice was hard now, anger and grief fueling her words. Fire at will. The battle became a massacre. Human ships fired on Valdrine vessels that couldn't defend themselves, couldn't return fire, couldn't even maneuver. It wasn't honorable. It wasn't fair. But it was war, and the Valdrine had violated the ceasefire first. Overlord Thraken sat in darkness on the Dominion's bridge. Emergency lights cast red shadows across the walls. His tactical displays were dead. His weapons were offline. He had lost. Completely and utterly lost. Can we get communications working? He asked quietly. After several minutes, a technician managed to restore basic communications using an emergency backup system. Thraken opened a channel to the human flagship. Admiral Ji-won's face appeared on his screen. She looked tired, sad, but also fierce and unbending. Overlord Thraken, Ji-won said. Surrender now or I will destroy every ship in your fleet. Thraken looked at her for a long moment. How, he asked. How did primitives defeat the Valdrine Empire? We're not primitives, Ji-won replied. We're survivors. We're a species that learned warfare before we learned spaceflight. We made mistakes, lost battles, suffered defeats, but we remembered every lesson. We wrote down every tactic. We preserved every strategy, and when we finally reached the stars, we brought all of that history with us. She paused, and her voice became softer, but no less determined. You saw old ships and assumed weakness. You saw preserved vessels and called them a museum. You were right to call us a museum. But museums exist to remember, and we remembered everything. The surrender happened at dawn, Earth time. Overlord Thraken signed the terms aboard the Incheon's Pride, surrounded by human officers and watched by representatives from a dozen other Galactic Council species who had rushed to witness what everyone was already calling the Battle of Kepler. Admiral G1 Park stood across from Thraken and accepted his formal surrender. The Valdrine commander looked smaller now, his forearms hanging limp at his sides. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like respect. "Your fleet fought well," Thraken said quietly. "Better than I thought possible." "My people died well," Ji-Wan corrected him. "There's a difference." She thought about the Guangzhou and her crew, about Captain Daejong and Lieutenant Yunji-Han, about the 3 generation ships and the captains who had sacrificed themselves to turn the tide of battle. 27 ships lost in total, over 8,000 crew members dead or wounded. The victory had come at a terrible cost. The Valdrine fleet limped away from human space 3 days later. They left behind their damaged ships and their dead. They also left behind their reputation. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within a week, every species in the Galactic Council knew what had happened. The Valdrine Empire, which had seemed unstoppable, had been defeated by a species barely 150 years into space travel. The Empire had lost 2/3 of its fleet to what they had called a museum collection. The other species took note. Back on Earth, Admiral Nari Choi stood before the Earth Council and presented her report. The room was packed with politicians, military officials, and representatives from Earth's colonies. Everyone wanted to understand what had happened. "Project Inheritance succeeded beyond our expectations," Nari said. "The Valdrine assumed our old ships were obsolete. That assumption cost them the battle. Our retrofitted vessels performed at or above the level of modern warships, while maintaining the appearance of outdated technology. But we lost so many people," one council member said. 8,000 casualties. Was it worth it? Nari looked at the politician for a long moment. "The Valdrine came to conquer us, to take our colonies and resources. If we had lost, those casualties would have numbered in the millions. Our people would have been enslaved or killed. So yes, Counselor, it was worth it. Those 8,000 saved billions." The room fell silent. No one could argue with that logic. Captain Hyun Kim was promoted to Admiral and given command of Earth's reconstruction efforts. His first task was to repair the damaged ships and honor the dead. The Guangzhou couldn't be repaired, but they recovered her nameplate and installed it in the Earth Naval Museum. Next to it, they placed a holographic display showing Lieutenant Yunji-Han's final transmission. "Not one step back," the recording said, over and over. Visitors to the museum would stand and watch it, and many would cry. The generation ships New Horizon, Destiny, and Wanderer were lost, but their sacrifice became legendary. Songs were written about them, poems composed. Their captains' names were carved into monuments on Earth, Mars, and Luna. Captain Sora Kim's daughter attended the dedication ceremony and wept as her mother was honored as a hero. Commander Minho Lee received command of a new flagship, but he requested something unusual. He wanted to keep the Soul Vengeance. The old colony ship had survived the battle with heavy damage, but she could be repaired. Minho wanted her back in service. "She's 400 years old," the shipyard commander told him. "We could build you something newer, better." "She's a survivor," Minho replied. "Like humanity. Fix her up. I want to fly her again." They did. The Soul Vengeance was repaired and upgraded once more. She became the flagship of Earth's Second Fleet, a symbol of humanity's resilience. When Minho walked her corridors, he could feel the history in every bulkhead. 4 centuries of human expansion and exploration, 2 major wars, and now a battle that had changed the galaxy. The ship remembered. That mattered. 5 months after the battle, the Galactic Council convened a special session. Admiral Nari Choi represented Earth, standing before representatives from 40 different species. The chamber was enormous, with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. Nari stood on that platform and felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon her. "The Earth delegation calls for sanctions against the Valdrine Empire," Nari said. "They violated the ceasefire during battle. They attacked human colonies without provocation. They have shown themselves to be aggressive and untrustworthy." The Valdrine representative tried to object, but he was shouted down. Species that had feared the Empire for generations now saw them as vulnerable. The vote was overwhelming. Sanctions were imposed. The Valdrine were forced to withdraw from a dozen systems they had conquered. Their military was limited to defensive operations only. But the most important outcome was what happened next. 7 species approached Earth with a proposal. They wanted to form a mutual defense alliance. If the Valdrine or any other aggressive power tried to expand again, they would face a united fleet. Earth agreed. The alliance was called the Coalition of Free Systems, and Admiral Jiwan Park was offered the position of Supreme Commander. She accepted. Within a year, the coalition fleet numbered over 600 ships from 8 different species. But at the heart of the fleet, preserved and honored, were the human vessels, the old destroyers and frigates, the colony ships and transports, the museum collection that had fought and won. Technician Do-Yun Shin, who had helped retrofit the old ships during Project Inheritance, was promoted to head of the coalition's shipyard operations. He was young, barely 30, but he had been part of something historic. Now he was tasked with applying those lessons to the entire coalition fleet. Should we retrofit all the coalition ships to look older? A fellow engineer asked him one day. Use deception the way Earth did? Do-Yun shook his head. No, that trick only works once. The Valdrine fell for it because they didn't respect us. But now everyone knows what we did. They'll be looking for hidden upgrades and concealed weapons. We need a different approach. What approach? Integration, Do-Yun said. Each species has strengths. The Kalari have excellent shield technology. The Thren build the fastest engines. The Morath have powerful weapons. We take the best from each species and combine it. Create ships that are better than what any of us could build alone. It was a good plan. Over the next 3 years, the coalition developed a new generation of warships that incorporated technology from all member species. They were powerful, efficient, and most importantly, they represented cooperation instead of conquest. But Earth never forgot the lesson of the museum fleet. Even as they built new ships, they preserved the old ones. The Soul Vengeance remained in active service. The destroyer Busan, which had survived the battle, was upgraded and given a place of honor in the coalition fleet. Dozens of other retrofitted vessels continued to serve. Admiral Jiwan Park eventually retired at the age of 73. She had served Earth and the coalition for 50 years, commanding fleets in 3 different wars. When she gave her final speech at the retirement ceremony, she spoke about memory and preservation. We live in an era of rapid technological change, Jiwan said. Every year ships become faster, weapons become more powerful, systems become more advanced. It's tempting to always chase the newest technology, to abandon the old for the new. But we must resist that temptation. We must remember that our old ships, our old weapons, our old strategies all represent lessons learned. They represent experience. They represent history. She paused and looked out at the audience, which included officers from every coalition species. The Valdrine called our fleet a museum, Jiwan continued. They meant it as an insult. But museums are sacred places. They preserve what matters. They remember what others forget. They teach lessons to future generations. So yes, we are a museum. We are a museum that remembers how to fight, how to survive, how to protect what we love. And that is not a weakness. That is our greatest strength. The applause lasted for 5 minutes. 10 years after the Battle of Kepler, a young cadet named Jinho was touring Earth's main shipyard as part of his training. He walked through the sections where new coalition warships were being constructed, marveling at the sleek designs and advanced systems. Then his instructor led the group to a different section, one that looked older and less polished. This is the preservation yard, the instructor explained. This is where we maintain and restore historical vessels. Jinho walked along the dock and saw dozens of old ships, colony vessels from Earth's early expansion, frigates from the first contact wars, destroyers that looked ancient but well-maintained. At the far end of the dock, he saw a massive ship that dwarfed everything else. The Soul Vengeance, is that? Jinho began. The ship that fought at Kepler, the instructor confirmed. She's still in active service. Commander Minho retired 5 years ago, but his successor maintains the ship according to his specifications. She's scheduled to deploy next month as part of the Coalition patrol fleet. But she's so old, Jinho said. Why not build something new? Something better? Technician Do-Yun Shin, who was supervising repairs nearby, overheard the question. He walked over to the young cadet and smiled. Because the old ones remember, Do-Yun said. Come here, let me show you something. The first Valdrine battleship to die was the Conquest, a heavy cruiser that had served the Empire for 60 years. She had been moving confidently toward the Soul Vengeance, her captain probably composing the report he would send back about destroying an ancient human colony ship. He never got to send that report. 3 antimatter missiles hit the Conquest simultaneously. Her quantum shields flared bright purple, absorbing the first impact. The second missile overloaded the shields completely. The third missile punched through her armor and detonated inside her reactor core. The explosion was visible from Earth, a brief new star that flickered and died in seconds. Target destroyed, Minho's tactical officer reported, his voice shaking slightly. Tracking indicates direct hits on 2 other Valdrine vessels, both showing critical damage. Minho nodded, his face grim. There was no joy in this. War was never something to celebrate, but it was necessary. Reload and acquire new targets. Focus on their command ships. Across the battlefield, the fight turned into chaos. The Valdrine had expected an easy victory. What they got was a nightmare. Human ships that should have been helpless were tearing through their formations with weapons that shouldn't exist. The Guangzhou's railguns proved especially devastating. Lieutenant Unjihan watched her targeting computer-track Valdrine ships and fired in steady rhythms. Each tungsten slug weighed only a few kilograms, but moving at relativistic speeds, they carried enormous kinetic energy. The Valdrine shields were designed to deflect energy, not solid matter moving at a fraction of light speed. Direct hit on enemy destroyer, Yunji reported. Their shield didn't even register the impact. Hull breach confirmed. They're venting atmosphere. Maintain fire, her captain ordered. Target their engine clusters. I want them dead in the water. The Valdrine had another problem they hadn't anticipated. Human tactics. Most galactic species had standardized their military doctrines over thousands of years. They had optimal formations, proper procedures, and accepted strategies. It made them efficient but predictable. Humans had no standardized doctrine. Earth had too many wars in its history, too many different approaches to combat. Admiral Jiwan and her captains had studied all of them. Ancient naval battles, submarine warfare, fighter tactics from atmosphere-based aircraft, guerrilla strategies. Everything humanity had ever learned about fighting was now being applied to space combat. The human fleet moved in patterns the Valdrine had never seen. Ships would cluster together for mutual defense, then scatter into individual units attacking from unexpected angles. Larger vessels would draw fire while smaller ships flanked the enemy. Ancient colony ships worked together like wolf packs, isolating Valdrine vessels and overwhelming them with concentrated fire. Overlord Thraken stood on the bridge of the Dominion and watched his carefully planned attack fall apart. His tactical display showed a mess of red warning indicators. 12 ships destroyed in the first 5 minutes. 20 more damaged. The human fleet, which should have been scattering in panic, was instead pressing the attack. This is impossible, Thraken growled. Those ships are ancient. Our intelligence confirmed their age. How can they have this kind of firepower? His tactical officer looked terrified. Overlord, their weapons are not what we expected. They're using antimatter warheads and kinetic impactors. Our shields are designed primarily for energy weapon defense. These solid projectiles are passing right through. Then adapt, Thraken roared. Reconfigure the shields. Focus on their command ship. If we take out their admiral, the fleet will collapse. It was sound strategy. Thraken had used it in a dozen campaigns. Remove the leader and the enemy loses coordination. But Admiral Jiwan had anticipated this too. The Inchin's Pride was positioned in the center of the human formation, protected by overlapping fields of fire from 6 other vessels. Any Valdrine ship trying to reach the flagship would have to run a gauntlet of weapons fire. 3 Valdrine cruisers tried anyway. They accelerated toward the Inchin's Pride, their plasma cannons blazing. The human defensive screen opened fire immediately. Railgun slugs and antimatter missiles filled the space between the fleets. 2 of the Valdrine cruisers were destroyed before they could close half the distance. The third made it within firing range but was hit by missiles from the Soul Vengeance before it could launch its attack. Their command ship is too well defended, Thraken's tactical officer reported. We're losing ships faster than we can inflict damage. Thraken stared at the tactical display, his 4 hands clenching in frustration. This wasn't how the battle was supposed to go. The humans should have been easy prey. Instead, they were fighting like a species with centuries more experience. Pull back, Thraken ordered. Reform at 10,000 kilometers. We need to regroup and assess their capabilities. It was the first smart decision he had made since the battle began. The Valdrine fleet began to retreat, using their superior engines to open distance between themselves and the human ships. It should have given them breathing room to reorganize, but Admiral Jiwan wasn't going to let them rest. All ships pursue, she ordered. Don't give them time to think. Keep the pressure on. Captain Hyun looked at her with concern. Admiral, if we overextend— They're off balance, Jiwon interrupted. We hurt them badly in the opening exchange, but they still have numerical superiority. If we let them regroup and adapt to our tactics, this gets much harder. We press now while they're confused. Hyun nodded and relayed the orders. The human fleet surged forward, chasing the retreating Valdrine. It looked reckless. It was the kind of aggressive move that military doctrine said you should never do. Don't pursue a larger force. Don't abandon defensive positions. Don't take unnecessary risks. But Jiwon wasn't following standard military doctrine. She was following lessons from 1,000 battles fought throughout human history. Sometimes pressing an advantage was the only way to win. Sometimes the bold move was the right move. Commander Minho pushed the Seoul Vengeance forward with the rest of the fleet. The old colony ship responded to his commands like she was built yesterday, her upgraded drives giving her acceleration that should have been impossible for something her size. Around him, his crew worked their stations with focus and precision. They knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a battle. This was Earth's announcement to the galaxy. This was humanity proving it belonged. Commander, multiple Valdrine ships are breaking formation, his tactical officer reported. They're scattering. I think they're panicking. Minho could see it on his display. The Valdrine fleet was losing cohesion. Individual captains were making their own decisions instead of following orders. Some tried to run. Others turned to fight. A few attempted to form defensive clusters. It was exactly what happened when a force lost confidence in its leadership. Lieutenant Yoonji continued firing the Gwangju's railguns, picking off Valdrine stragglers. Each shot was carefully calculated. She didn't waste ammunition. Didn't fire unless she had a clear target. Her grandfather had served on this very ship 200 years ago during humanity's expansion wars. She felt his presence now guiding her hands. Target the engines, not the reactors, her captain ordered. Let's disable them if we can. Dead ships can surrender. Destroyed ships are just casualties. Yoonji adjusted her targeting priorities. It was harder to disable a ship than destroy it, but it was the right thing to do. This was a battle for survival, not genocide. Humanity didn't want to destroy the Valdrine. They just wanted them to leave human space alone. Thraken watched his fleet dissolve around him and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Fear. Real, genuine fear. Not for his life, but for his reputation, for his career. He had commanded fleets for 40 years. He had conquered worlds, and now he was losing to a species that the galactic community considered primitive. Overlord, we're receiving distress calls from the Vengeance and the Dark Star, his communications officer reported. Both ships have lost main power. They're requesting assistance. We can't help them, Thraken said bitterly. We can barely help ourselves. He looked at his tactical display one more time. The numbers were brutal. 47 ships destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost only 8. 8 vessels against 47. It was the worst defeat the Valdrine military had suffered in a century. Open a channel to the human admiral, Thraken said quietly. His pride was shattered, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. On the Incheon's pride, Admiral Jiwon received the transmission. Overlord Thraken's face appeared on her screen. He looked different now. The arrogance was gone. His eyes held the weight of defeat. Admiral Park, Thraken said. His voice was steady but strained. I request a ceasefire to retrieve our damaged vessels and tend to our wounded. Jiwon considered for a long moment. Around her, the bridge crew waited in silence. They had won the opening engagement, but the battle wasn't over. The Valdrine still had superior numbers. If Thraken decided to fight to the end, many more would die on both sides. Ceasefire granted, Jiwon said finally. You have 2 hours to collect your damaged ships. After that, you will withdraw from human space. If you refuse, we will resume combat. Commander Minho Lee stood on the bridge of the Seoul Vengeance and remembered the day they had pulled her from the graveyard. That was 3 years ago. The ship had been floating dead in orbit around Jupiter for 200 years, one of dozens of colony vessels that had served their purpose and been retired. She was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long, built in an era when humanity still used nuclear fusion for power and chemical thrusters for maneuvering. Weapons ready, Commander, said his tactical officer, all systems green. Minho nodded but said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the Valdrine fleet in the distance. Even from millions of kilometers away, he could see them on the tactical display, advancing in their perfect formations. They had no idea what was about to hit them. The Soul Vengeance wasn't alone. Around her, the rest of Earth's First Fleet held position. To Minho's left was the Gwangju, a destroyer so old her original crew would have been dust for 3 centuries. To his right, the Generation ship New Horizon drifted in the void, her ancient hull scarred by micrometeorite impacts from 400 years in space. They looked like relics. That was the point. 10 years ago, when the Galactic Council first warned Earth about the Valdrine Empire's expansion, most human politicians had panicked. Earth was new to galactic politics. Humanity had only achieved faster-than-light travel 150 years earlier. They were children compared to species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. But Admiral Nari Choi, who commanded Earth defense from Luna Base, had seen an opportunity where others saw only fear. She had gone to the orbital graveyards and looked at the hundreds of ships floating there, ships that had carried humanity across the solar system and to the nearest stars, ships that politicians wanted to break down for scrap metal. We're going to need these, Nari had told the Earth Council. Every single one. They had called her crazy. The cost would be enormous. Those ships were ancient. Modern vessels were faster, more efficient, better armed. Why waste resources on outdated technology? Nari had shown them the files from humanity's military history. She showed them battles from Earth's oceans, from wars fought centuries before spaceflight. She showed them how submarines had defeated surface fleets, how aircraft carriers had changed naval warfare, how technology wasn't everything, how surprise and deception could turn the tide of any battle. Let them think we're weak, Nari had said. Let them think we're desperate. Let them see old ships and assume we have nothing better. Then we show them what those old ships can really do. It had taken 5 years to convince the politicians, another 5 years to actually do the work. Project Inheritance, they called it. They pulled every mothballed vessel from storage. They brought in the best engineers humanity had. They gutted the old ships and rebuilt them from the inside out. Minho remembered the first time he had walked through the Soul Vengeance after the retrofit. From outside, she looked exactly the same. The hull was still scarred and worn. The engines were the same massive fusion reactors from her original construction. The weapons mounts still looked like modified cargo cranes. But inside, everything had changed. The old fusion reactor had been replaced with a zero-point energy core, powerful enough to light up a small city. The chemical thrusters were gone, replaced by gravity manipulation drives that could accelerate the massive ship like a fighter craft. The cargo cranes were still there, but now they held antimatter missiles, each one powerful enough to crack a moon. Every ship in the fleet had received similar treatment. Ancient nuclear warheads had been upgraded to antimatter charges. Railguns that had once fired solid slugs now launched projectiles at relativistic speeds. Armor plating that had been designed to stop micrometeorites now incorporated molecular bonding technology that could absorb energy weapon impacts. Commander, the Valdrine are in range, his tactical officer reported. Admiral Park is holding position. Minho watched the tactical display. The Valdrine fleet had spread out into an attack formation. They were confident. Why wouldn't they be? They had superior numbers and, as far as they knew, superior technology. They had probably fought dozens of battles just like this one. Small, weak species trying to resist the Empire's expansion. It always ended the same way. Except this time it wouldn't. Lieutenant Yunji Han sat at her weapons console aboard the Gwangju and ran through her final checks. The destroyer was one of the oldest ships in the fleet, built 380 years ago during humanity's first expansion beyond the solar system. She had fought in 3 different wars before being retired. Now she was back for one more battle. Power level stable, Yunji reported to her captain. Railguns charged and ready. The Gwangju's main weapons were twin railguns mounted along her spine. They had been designed to fire tungsten slugs at enemy ships during humanity's early space conflicts. But the engineers had modified them. The new railguns used gravitational acceleration to launch projectiles at nearly 10% the speed of light. At that velocity, even a small piece of metal carried the kinetic energy of a nuclear weapon. The Valdrine used energy shields. Most advanced species did. Energy shields were excellent at deflecting plasma weapons, particle beams, and other high-tech armaments. But they had a weakness. They weren't designed to stop solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. Why would they be? What species still use primitive kinetic weapons? Earth did, and Earth had kept that secret very carefully. All ships, this is Admiral Park. Jiwan's voice came over the fleet channel, calm and steady. The Valdrine are beginning their attack run. Remember your training. Hold your positions until my command. Don't fire until I give the word. Let them come to us. Minho watched his screens as the Valdrine fleet accelerated. They were moving into their optimal firing range, the distance where their plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes would be most effective. They expected the human ships to scatter. That's what inferior forces did when facing a superior enemy. They panicked and broke formation. The human fleet didn't move. Commander, they're targeting us specifically, Minho's tactical officer said with some tension in his voice. 3 Valdrine cruisers are focusing on the Soul Vengeance. Let them, Minho replied. He gripped his command chair and waited. Every second felt like an hour. He could imagine the Valdrine commanders right now, laughing as they prepared to destroy what they thought was a helpless colony ship. They probably thought this would be easy. On the Incheon's Pride, Admiral Jiwan watched the distances close. Her tactical display showed each Valdrine ship, their weapons hot and ready. She could see their targeting solutions, their attack vectors, their confident formations. Captain Hyun stood beside her, his hand hovering over his own console. Admiral, they're at optimal range. If we wait much longer, I know, Jiwan said quietly. She watched the numbers count down. Closer, closer. She needed them to commit fully. She needed them to believe they had already won. The first Valdrine battleship fired. Plasma torpedoes screamed through space toward the human fleet. They were beautiful in a terrible way. Balls of superheated matter that could melt through starship armor like butter. Now, Jiwan said, all ships activate systems. Show them what we brought to this fight. Across the fleet, captains gave the order. Engineers threw switches. Systems that had been carefully hidden powered up for the first time in combat. The Soul Vengeance lit up like a star. Her energy signature jumped from barely noticeable to blinding. Defensive screens that the Valdrine didn't know existed suddenly surrounded the massive colony ship. The incoming plasma torpedoes hit the shields and dissipated harmlessly. Commander Minho smiled. Return fire. Launch all missiles. The Soul Vengeance's cargo cranes, which the Valdrine had probably dismissed as useless junk, opened up. Antimatter missiles burst from concealed launch tubes, dozens of them, each one tracking a different Valdrine target. All across the human fleet, old ships revealed their new teeth. The Gwangju's railguns fired, sending relativistic slugs through space faster than the Valdrine sensors could track. The Generation ship New Horizon activated point defense systems that had been disguised as sensor arrays. Frigates that looked barely functional suddenly accelerated with impossible speed. The Valdrine fleet's confidence shattered in seconds. The warning came at dawn across Earth's defense network. Admiral Jiwan Park stood in the command center on Luna Base, watching the tactical display with tired eyes. She had been expecting this moment for months, but seeing it happen still sent ice through her veins. 200 warships had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of human territory. The Valdrine Empire had arrived. Get me a count, Jiwan said quietly. Her silver hair was pulled back tight and her uniform showed the wear of too many sleepless nights. Around her, dozens of officers worked their stations, their faces lit by the glow of holographic screens. Captain Hyun Kim looked up from his console. He was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Confirmed. 203 vessels, Admiral. All military grade. They're holding position near the Kepler system. Jiwan nodded slowly. It was worse than intelligence had predicted. The Valdrine didn't send fleets that size unless they meant to conquer or destroy. For the past year, the Empire had been pushing into human space, demanding that Earth surrender its colonies in the Outer Rim. Those colonies held rare minerals that powered starship engines. The Valdrine wanted them. Earth had refused. Send the signal, Jiwan said. Activate the first fleet. Across the solar system, ancient machines woke from their long sleep. In orbital graveyards around Earth, Mars, and Jupiter, ships that had been mothballed for decades or even centuries began to power up. Reactor cores that hadn't fired in 100 years rumbled to life. Engines that once carried humanity's first colonists to distant worlds ignited once more. The Valdrine detected the movement immediately. Overlord Thrackan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion, and watched the sensor readings with amusement. His species stood nearly 7 feet tall with dark purple skin and 4 arms. He had conquered 12 star systems in his career. The humans would be his 13th. Report, Thraken commanded. His tactical officer studied the incoming data. The humans are mobilizing their fleet, Overlord. 89 vessels are moving to intercept us. 89? Thraken laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Against 200? They're either brave or stupid. There's something else, Overlord. The tactical officer hesitated. The ships, they're old. Very old. Our scans show some of them are over 400 years old. They appear to be colony vessels and early military designs from humanity's expansion period. Thraken moved closer to the display, studying the images of the approaching human fleet. The ships were a bizarre collection. Some were massive generation ships built in the early days of human space travel, their hulls scarred and worn. Others were frigates and destroyers from outdated design eras. A few looked like cargo haulers that someone had bolted weapons onto. Is this a joke? Thraken asked. These are museum pieces. Some of these designs shouldn't even be space-worthy anymore. His crew shared nervous laughter. The Valdrine had fought many wars across the galaxy. They had battled species with powerful energy shields, devastating plasma weapons, and ships that could bend space itself. But they had never seen anything like this. The human fleet looked like something from a historical archive. Open a channel, Thraken ordered. Let me speak to whoever commands this collection of antiques. The communication request went out across the void. On the bridge of the Inchun's Pride, Admiral Jiwan received it. Her flagship was one of the newer vessels in the fleet, but even it was 80 years old. She had commanded it for 20 years and knew every bolt and wire in its hull. Put him through, Jiwan said. Overlord Thraken's face appeared on the main screen. He was smiling, showing rows of sharp teeth. I am Overlord Thraken of the Valdrine Empire. I assume you command what the humans call a fleet? I am Admiral Jiwan Park of Earth Defense Command, she replied calmly. You have entered human space without permission. Turn your ships around and leave, or we will force you to leave. Thraken laughed again. Force us with what? I'm looking at your fleet composition, Admiral. Half your ships are older than my grandfather. You've brought me a floating museum. Some of those vessels should be in scrapyards, not battle formations. Other Valdrine officers joined in the laughter. Jiwan could hear them in the background mocking the human ships. One called them space garbage. Another wondered if humanity was so poor they couldn't afford real warships. Captain Hyun stood beside Jiwan, his jaw tight with anger. But Jiwan remained calm. She had expected this. In fact, she had counted on it. You don't understand what you're looking at, Jiwan said quietly. Oh, I understand perfectly, Thraken replied. I see a species that has sent everything it has to stop me, and everything it has is 4 centuries out of date. Admiral Park, I'm going to give you one chance. Surrender now. Order your museum pieces to stand down. I'll allow your crews to evacuate before I destroy those wrecks. This is mercy, human. Take it. Jiwan stared at the Valdrine commander for a long moment. Around her, the bridge crew waited in silence. They knew what was coming. They had trained for this day, prepared for this moment. Every person on every ship in the fleet knew the truth that the Valdrine couldn't see. No, Jiwan said simply. Thraken's smile faded. Then you've chosen death. My fleet will cut through yours like it's not even there. You'll be forgotten, Admiral. A footnote in history. The leader who brought antiques to fight a war. Perhaps, Jiwan said. Or perhaps you'll be remembered as the commander who didn't recognize a trap until it closed around him. She cut the transmission before Thraken could respond. The screen went dark. For a moment, the bridge was silent. All ships reporting ready, Admiral, Hyun said. The fleet is in position. Jiwan looked at the tactical display. Her 89 ships faced Thraken's 200 across the darkness of space. To any observer, it looked like suicide. The Valdrine had more ships, better technology, and centuries of military experience. The human fleet looked like something scraped together from salvage yards. But Jiwan knew something the Valdrine didn't. She knew what was hidden beneath those old hulls. She knew what upgrades had been installed in secret over the past 10 years. She knew that sometimes the best weapon was letting your enemy underestimate you. All ships, Jiwan broadcast across the fleet. Stand ready. Hold formation. Wait for my signal. Across the void, the Valdrine fleet began to advance. Thraken had ordered a slow, confident approach. He wanted to savor this. He wanted to watch the humans realize their mistake before his weapons tore their ancient ships apart. Admiral Jiwan Park watched them come. Her hand rested on the arm of her command chair. Her heart beat steady and slow. She had been preparing for this moment for most of her career. Earth had been preparing for this moment since humanity first learned they weren't alone in a hostile galaxy. The Valdrine thought they understood what they were facing. They were wrong. They were about to learn a lesson that humanity had learned long ago. In wars fought on Earth's oceans, centuries before humans ever reached the stars. Never judge a ship by its age. Judge it by what it can do when the battle begins.